listening to the Noble Life podcast, brought to you by Noble Life. Noble Life is an online health and lifestyle coaching system that guides you through the long-term improvements of your physical, psychological, personal and practical life. On this podcast, we bring you guests from different specialities who embody the Noble Code of pride, passion, purpose and power. Through our guests' stories and experiences, you'll be inspired and informed on how to optimize yourself and improve on balancing your own lifestyle to become the best version of yourself. On this episode of the Noble Life podcast, we have Hugh Robinson. Now, Hugh works with qualified coaches, but gets them to the higher level so that they're actually practicing what they preach and truly enjoying their working life instead of just being in the grind, which a lot of the time coaches are trying to help other people get out of anyway. This is actually how I know Hugh originally, because when I was still working in the oil industry, and much of my career in the oil industry was coaching people on technical aspects and on employment and stuff like that, and I was thinking to myself, I want to get out of this, I want to get into something else. And the company that Hugh was working for at the time, I engaged and started talking to Hugh and met him down in Australia. And now he's gone on to do his own thing as well, to the stage where he's actually moved halfway across the world and is now in Amsterdam, I believe.
Yeah, just south of Amsterdam, just in a little city called The Hague. But yeah, just about 30 minutes south of Amsterdam, and moved here a few months ago. That's
brilliant, mate. And you're enjoying it, yeah?
Yeah, it's great to be back in Europe. I left England 4 years ago to go on this huge journey, both physically, emotionally, spiritually, and it's been an experience. So I literally hadn't been home for nearly 4 years until a few months ago when me and my girlfriends went to visit my mum and then moved here. I've been living all over the place. Lived in Asia for about a year, living in Thailand and Bali. Moved to Australia for the best part of 3 years. We spent a good half of this year traveling Asia before moving here. So it's been quite an adventure.
It's quite interesting that you did a big physical journey while going through this career and spiritual and mental journey as well. So let's first of all just start off with, where did you start? Like, where were you originally living? What were you originally doing? And what made you decide to start off?
Yeah, sure. So about 4 years ago, I was coming to the end of my personal training career. I basically, long story short, 11 years ago, I was in terrible shape. I was struggling with a lot of health conditions. I was lost in life. I was only 16 at the time, so a lot of 16-year-olds are generally lost. They don't really have much direction, living in a small town in northern England. I didn't know what I wanted to do in my life. And that was kind of made worse when basically 2 days before I turned 17, my dad passed away. And that was like the catalyst for me getting into personal development. Like, I was kind of getting to this tipping point of pain where everything in my life was kind of, in my view at the time, being a victim. I felt like everything was happening to me. And this was like the final thing that tipped me over the edge. And I basically made a decision to sort my life out. Now, it wasn't this linear journey where everything just ran smoothly and everything fit into place. It was a struggle. I managed to get some clarity on fitness and got really into fitness. And what I found over the last 11 years is there was always a point I get to. And even though physically in my life things were going quite well, emotionally, spiritually, there were just things that were out of alignment. I wasn't truly happy. And so over the next few years, I went to university. I struggled a lot with drinking and falling into those kind of traps of like binge drinking really heavily to fit in. But slowly but surely, I got more and more into personal development on a deeper level. Started working on my mind, and then going deeper. Started working on my emotional health. Working with hiring life coaches to work with me as my coach, to work through a lot of the trauma of the past, which I think is a really important aspect that most people don't look at. They're always trying to change their environment around them, trying to change things externally. But for me, what I realized is the more I can change internally, everything in my life is reflected from that. So fast forward a few years anyway. Last 4 years ago, I was working as a personal trainer, and I was feeling unfulfilled. I knew at this point in my life, I'd been through quite a bit of a journey already. I knew that people needed a deeper level of coaching to get the results that they really wanted. And I also had a huge passion for travel. Like I was living in Bristol at the time, which is my hometown. And I just felt stuck. Like there was something in me, this pull for more. Like I was single. I had a good group of friends, but like I knew there was more for me in life. Like I'd done some traveling previously. I'd been to Asia and America, and I'd met people from different aspects of life. And so I wanted to see more of the world, and I'd just been stuck as a personal trainer in England for 2 years. So I've been slowly building this online program, which was about kind of nutrition and mindfulness. And I remember I was listening to Tony Robbins' audiobook, and I was just walking one morning, and I was just feeling like quite low, quite depressed. And I listened to this audiobook to pick myself back up, and he talks about making a decision and following through on that decision straight away. Because what happens a lot of the time is we think about doing something and then we never follow through with it. So it's that 5-second rule of like, right, I'm going to just follow through on this as soon as possible. So I listened to that. I quit my job and I made the decision to go fully online. So a month later, I booked a one-way ticket to, I booked a return ticket to South Africa, spent Christmas in South Africa with some friends that I've met. And that's when it kind of clicked for me, like, wow, I can make this a lifestyle if I really want. I don't need to live in England. I can go and I can do this. So I went home, sold everything I owned, got rid of my flat, got rid of my car, got rid of everything apart from a backpack of clothes, my laptop, my phone, some electronics, and then I booked a one-way ticket to Thailand.
That's kind of insane, man, because at that stage, you were what age?
I was 20, so 4 years ago, I was 23.
23-year-old doing that is really quite amazing because really, if we're honest, and I'm not saying this to trigger any of the 23-year-olds listening, but when I look back at myself at 23, I was a young offshore engineer that, financially was doing quite well, apart from the fact that I was pissing it all up against the wall. But yeah. I didn't really think I had really two brain cells to rub together emotionally or anything like that. I mean, it takes people a long time to realise, and for those that listen to the podcast regularly, they'll know that I talk about this all the time with the 4 pillars of physical, psychological, personal, and practical. But you were talking about at least 3 of those when you were in your early 20s already.
I got exposed to personal development early. I think a lot of the time with people, they need to go, there's a depth that people get to in their life of pain, which allows them to finally reflect and look within. So that for some people isn't always a huge traumatic experience. Like for me, it was losing my dad, but for some people it's just boredom and being stuck in the, like yourself, like when you're working offshore, right? There gets to a point where you get stuck and you're like, and for me, I had this again 4 years ago when I was in the personal training job. I was making good money. I was getting results for people. I had a good group of friends. Like my life was good. But I asked myself the question, is this as good as it gets? And for me, I'm someone who is driven by growth. I think on a deeper level, I think our reason for being here as humans is to grow personally, but also to contribute. As we grow, we can contribute more. And so when you feel like you're not growing, even on a subconscious level, when we're not thinking about this, deep down, there's this feeling that something needs to change. Like I'm stuck if I'm not growing. And so I had that experience from quite a young age. And I think it's just because I was exposed to a lot of pain at an earlier stage, which pushed me into personal development at an earlier stage. Some people may not have that process until they're 40, 50, because they've had a cruisy life. There's not been anything to question stuff. I've always been quite inquisitive. I've always questioned things. Like even in school, I was quite like rebellious in the sense of, not being an asshole to teachers, but I was always rebellious in the sense of like questioning everything. Like, why am I learning this? Why is this important? Why is this important? And obviously in school, your teacher just tells you to shut up and get on and do the work. But as I grew older, what I realized was that those are really, really important aspects of growth. Like the people that ask the best questions are the people that grow the most because they start to think outside the box. And so for me, like, especially when I left university and I wasn't in this box of education, I could start to learn from things that I was really interested about, hiring coaches, mentors, doing courses, learning stuff from YouTube and blogs, just really exposing myself to stuff. And like Google's such a powerful tool for this now. Like if you start questioning something, then you can type into Google, whatever your question is, and you can start finding resources, connecting with people who are writing blogs or doing podcasts, right? And start having those back and forths. I think I was fortunate enough at a young age to, younger anyway, when I was like 21, 22, and I started joining business masterminds for my old PT business. I started getting exposed to people who were a lot further along this personal development journey. And that's something that's really, really important as well. Like, it's not just in finances, but just finding people who are a few steps ahead of you and learning from them, whether you hire them as a mentor or whether you join some sort of group, like socially, but surrounding yourself with people who are on the same journey as you and who are further ahead of that journey, I think is a really powerful way to accelerate that personal growth.
So there's quite a number of different aspects you just mentioned there. So I just want to kind of briefly summarize that there. One of the biggest ones you mentioned was the catalyst, the trigger. Now, you mentioned it quite descriptively there, but the way I always look at it is it can happen through overwhelm or stagnation, and that's how you end up in the pit. So you had quite an overwhelming experience, which was unfortunately your dad passing, but out of that trauma came the catalyst to get you moving on this journey. But that does happen, as you say, when people stagnate, when they get bored of doing something, and then the same thing can happen at a much slower pace. The other thing that you spoke about, which you didn't say in so many words, the type of person you are has a lot to do with this. If you're happy doing nothing, if you're happy just accepting the status quo, this journey is going to be a lot harder. You've got to ask the tough questions. You've got to piss some people off. You've got to be continuously wanting more information. The third aspect, which I didn't really think about until you were talking about it there, was that when you were in your early 20s, there was actually quite good access to Google and blogs and aspects to the internet where you were able to get together with people. Because when I'm thinking back, when I was 19, 20, that really wasn't a thing. I'm one of the lucky ones that when I was at university, cameras weren't on mobile phones. There is no proof evidence of my ridiculousness at university. Whereas everybody a wee bit younger, you guys are screwed. But that aspect definitely has an impact on the speed of development, because the access to information is hugely powerful. But at the same time, it can also be an overwhelm, which is why it's important, as you say, to seek out those that are a few steps ahead, because all that information can end up just being noise. So once you'd done that, once you'd moved to South Africa and you were staying out there and you brought your coaching completely online, now at this point that was PT coaching and mindset, is that correct?
Yeah, I was initially coaching people. So I'd spent years qualifying as a personal trainer, doing my degree in sports science and nutrition, interning as a strength and conditioning coach for rugby and hockey players. I get just lots of different experiences to find what I was passionate about. But I got a real passion for nutrition, especially after working through a lot of health issues I had around chronic fatigue and IBS. So I went down the route of nutrition and mindfulness coaching, because I also realized that a big component of losing weight, which was my initial business, is called the Weight Loss Academy. It was very, very surface level in terms of results, but it was really focused on, once they joined the program, it's very much focused on their mindset and their emotional health, to then get the physical results that they want. But just to rewind a little bit, I think something you brought up there is really important, and something that I've kind of been thinking about a lot this last year, which is how technology impacts overall transformation. So obviously as coaches and helping people on a personal level with transformation, what I've realized is really, really profound is that throughout history, as our technology has increased as humans, our level of consciousness has increased as well, which feeds back into that technology, because as our level collectively, as our collective consciousness increases, we're able to then create more technology that has this knock-on effect as well. And especially the last kind of couple of decades with social media and the internet, that's just exploded. So I think so many people are starting to wake up now and start to question more because they're exposed to new ideas. I think if you grow up in a small town and you're just exposed to the same, few thousand people that have the same beliefs, same religious beliefs, same political beliefs, same life beliefs, money beliefs, health beliefs, and you're not exposed externally because of the internet, then it makes sense as to why people get stuck in that cycle. And now, because over time with media, first of all, it was travel and different communities traveling to other communities and learning new information to take back to their communities. That evolved, in the last 100, 150 years with newspaper and print, with radio, then TV. Now it's just exploding through social media and the internet.
So one of the things that I've become quite aware of, as the technology rises, generally what happens is the physical ability starts to drop a little bit. So that's when it's important to try and actively push it up. So using the US as an example, because they've got the most data on this thing, but during the Industrial Revolution in America, when people were coming from the farms and living in more rural areas to factories and technology starting to boom and everybody was moving into the cities, yes, a lot of the bad diseases started to sort of decline because, medicine and technology were getting better. But because people were living in a lot more enclosed spaces, it was dirty, they weren't getting the same activity as they used to, because you go from working on a farm to working in a factory, it's a big difference in the amount of energy output. So people started to get sick. People started to feel unwell, but not like, I've got polio. It was, I've not got the same energy, I'm feeling fatigued, or my sex drive is gone, or I'm balding, I'm feeling stressed. So that was because of an increase in technology, which was overall a good thing. But at the same time, there was that drop as well. And that was really when sports became a big thing. And as the internet starts to rise, the same thing starts to happen. You get more of a focus on wellness, on nutrition, on mindfulness, because as technology rises, these things naturally start to decline. So it's important to actually academically boost these things up.
Yeah, definitely. I think there's growth pains with everything. So as we transition as humanity into, let's say, the Industrial Revolution, right, we're making huge progress in terms of the technology that we're building infrastructure with, but there's a lag. There's a drag behind it, which is, okay, now we've got all these problems to solve around health, around well-being, around performance, around energy, right? And over time, that was, definitely not fully fixed, but that was improved. Now it's with the internet, the issues are kind of deeper. It's like now people are struggling more with their mental health. People are lacking purpose. People are struggling with isolation. And so I see over the next kind of couple of decades, I think these resources that people share with, as you say, with mindfulness and things like that, that's going to catch up as well. So it's that lag effect with growth. Whilst the systems are changing and shifting, personally, sometimes people are a bit slow to adjust to that as well in a positive way. So I think there's always that like growth pain, personally as you grow, but also systemically as we all grow together.
So what did you see in your own experience which actually compelled you to move away from the PT side of things, the physical fat loss side of things? And yes, you're also working on the mindset kind of things, which does kind of go hand in hand with any kind of transformation. But at this stage, you're now going deeper again. So what did you see in people, in the public, or in yourself that made you decide to take that step?
overall, like on a deep level, I mean, there's two things. One is going deeper from your mindset. I think a lot of the time when people start to learn about mindset, they're focused on cognition, like motivation, like trying to cognitively change aspects of their life. But that's not where change happens. The cognition is controlling things that your subconscious already knows and understands and processes. So then the question is, well, how do you change your subconscious, which is like your programming? It's like systems that run the processes. So to break this down into simplistic terms, I look at this as shifts in consciousness. So there's four like primary states of consciousness. A lot of people are stuck in the lowest form of consciousness, which is the level of to me, that victim mindset. Everything is happening to me, and you internalize everything. I was in this stage when my dad passed away. Why is life so tough? Why is life so challenging? Why is everything happening to me? Then what we see is the next shift, which a lot of hardworking people get to in corporate life, in personal trainers, and I experienced this as a personal trainer, entrepreneurs, which is the next stage of consciousness, which is by me, which is where you're forcing, you're hustling, you're pushing your way through. I'm going to make this happen by me, pushing my way through. So it's like the next stage where a lot of people get stuck. After that is where you start to, rather than forcing your way through, this next stage is about letting go, which is the state of through me, which is where you start to accept things as they are, allow them to happen, and you start to take experiences as lessons. And this was a huge thing for me. It's like even everything, good or bad, is just your own perception of it. So, my dad passing away was obviously a negative experience, but in light of that, it taught me some really valuable lessons, and I accept it as just part of the process. Like for a long time, I can be held back by the past and argue with it, but it's not going to change the past. What changes is my perception of the past by accepting it as just something that happened for my own growth and the growth of other people as well. Right? It's not that it was a good experience, but I'm just detaching myself away from it negatively, and that allows me to flow, which gets into that state of through me, right? So you start to get into flow the more you let go of stuff and the more you accept the past as well. I think a lot of the time people bottle stuff up and they don't really process it. This is where like therapy and working on like timeline therapy and stuff like that is really good to dive into it, to process those memories and to accept them and let go of them. It's not getting attached to them and saying like, oh, well, it was a good thing that happened, or oh man, that really sucks. It's just going through and letting go of it. So that's the next stage. And then the final stage, this took me a very long time to comprehend. And this is where I got really into spirituality, which was the state of as me. And this is where you see everybody as you. And this for me, like from a mindset perspective, is being compassionate. So I realized this traveling as well. Growing up, we're all conditioned differently. We're all exposed to different beliefs, ideologies, politically, religiously. We were talking about this earlier. And so when you connect with people and they share stories and they tell you things and they share their beliefs, there can be conflicts, right? There can be issues around your beliefs versus theirs. What I realized below the surface is we all, wherever we're from, whatever our conditioning, we all feel the same emotions, and that's how we can connect with each other. So when you start diving into your emotions and realizing we all feel fear, doubt, we all feel love, we all feel compassion, we all feel peace, we all feel anger, right? We can connect at this level because there's that similarity and there's that that symbiotic relationship with everybody around us. And so that for me was like really profound. It took me a long time to get my head around this, but when I started viewing that, I stopped getting attached to how other people were acting in my life. And so even like day-to-day stuff, I still get pissed off, I still get angry, but I can move through it a lot faster because I realize that's just me in a different light. That's somebody else with their own experiences, expressing themselves and projecting their own thoughts and behaviors onto the world around them. And so that's been like quite a profound shift, and that's only come in the last couple of years of really diving into spirituality, meditation, studying Zen Buddhism. I'm not religious. I don't consider myself religious. I look at Buddhism as like a really good philosophy. And that for me was like really about understanding spirituality and how we're all kind of connected in this world.
It's very interesting because I've also looked into Buddhism as a sort of guideline for things as well. What I tend to do is take away the flowery language of it so that people don't really realize it's Buddhism.
Yeah.
But then after they've done it, I do highlight it to them, just say, by the way, this is what it was. But it's really about, from what you're talking about there, because I've noticed it myself, because I used to have a fierce temper. Whereas now, a lot of people that have only known me for a little while say, oh, Fraser's always pretty calm, he's never really that annoyed. But it's not about controlling, it's about managing it and knowing that these feelings are your feelings and you've got to process them healthily. And I think that's one of the big difference between the phases, as you put them. I like the idea of these different phases of consciousness. But the one thing I would ask is that sort of language, when you're using that kind of language and terms with regards to going in the phases, do you not feel that the common misconception that you get is that it sounds a little bit flowery and a little bit woo-woo?
I generally work with people who are because I work with coaches, they generally are understanding of this. So if I was to break this down and to communicate this to the general public, which I used to do with my coaching, I don't talk about stages of consciousness. I break it down really simply and talk about more maybe emotions, right? And it's not, you don't get from one stage to the other and you're suddenly enlightened and you never experience lower forms of consciousness. Even on a day-to-day level, there'll be times in the day where I fall into that victim mindset and then I have to pull myself back up. But through the different stages, what you experience is different emotions. So let's say if you're feeling a lot of fear, doubts, you might be in that kind of low end of the spectrum. If you're starting to feel anger and resentment, that's good because it's pushing you a little bit, and you might be in that state of buy me where you're trying to, you're angry, but you're going to the gym. You're like, right, I'm going to get this anger out of me, right? But then once you move through that, that's where you can start accepting like peace and love and happiness and all this other stuff on the higher end of the spectrum. So for me to break it down into layman's terms for someone that maybe thinks that's a bit woo-woo or not really fully understanding it, I basically the way I break it down is by moving through it, by accepting it. So even mentally, right? If you're struggling, what I've realized as well with a lot of issues of mental health in my past, we're really struggling with depression and severe anxiety and stress. For me, and I think this is the same thing with everyone, we try and push our way through it and fight our way through it. And we're not very accepting of ourselves because we see it as a weakness. Whereas when you can actually take a step back and say, I'm feeling pretty depressed, like I'm feeling pretty down. I actually had this a couple of days ago. Like I was having a really good day and I suddenly started feeling really heavy and started feeling a bit overwhelmed and a bit down. And rather than try and, chug a coffee and push through it, I thought, right, I'm going to apply some of these skills that I know. I lay down and I just allowed myself to feel shit. I allowed myself to feel down, feel depressed, and basically just like took my barriers off. I think there's real strength in vulnerability. And by doing that, some stuff just got brought to surface. Like I didn't feel like crying, but then all of a sudden I was crying. I was like, and then there were all these emotions coming up, and from that were memories. And I realized, wow, there's some unresolved stuff here. So I started like thinking about, shut my eyes and processing those memories and going through them and doing this work of like, not getting attached to these memories, just like it's essentially watching them on a screen in my mind and being like, okay, I went through this and I've obviously not processed it. So I need to go back through these memories, visualize them and let go of them. And then from there, I started to feel light again. I started to, ascend from feeling, kind of low, depressed, down in that victim state of mind to start to feeling good and got back into flow in the afternoon. So I think that's probably a simpler way to break it down. It's about being in tune with how you're feeling and what the thoughts are as well. A lot of people have a very negative dialogue in their heads and they think very negatively about things. In which case, if you're going through that, then I'd invite you to think about taking a step back and rather than trying to process things in your head and try and like use affirmations and tell yourself, oh, everything's good, take a step back and just shut everything out and just look at how you feel, like what is actually going on, like accept how you're feeling, and then you can move through it.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. And in fact, it's actually part of the Noble Code, which for people that are regular listeners, they will know this by now as well. But yeah, we've got the first 2 points of it are pride and passion. And pride is basically looking at the facts of any situation, totally devoid of the feelings. And then your passion is exactly looking at that as your feelings, but keeping them like as if you've taken that step back so that you can process them a lot more clearly. But as you say, so many people just try to hide from them, pretend that they're not feeling sad, pretend they're not feeling angry. And it's not a healthy way of doing it, but more importantly, it's not an effective way of living.
No,
And
it's not.
What ends up happening is people, they get so frustrated, they just end up completely giving up. And it's just such a powerful thing to have that vulnerability. And I just think that's incredibly important that you said that. And in fact, when I had Coach George Castro on the podcast a couple of weeks ago, who is an ex-professional MMA fighter, he's currently a strength and conditioning and fight coach for Brandon Vera, who's the heavyweight champion of ONE FC. This guy's a tough dude. He's a good friend, but he's a big, powerful, some might even suggest scary looking guy. But when he was on the podcast, he opened up and started to show his vulnerability. And the feedback I got from people that had listened to that were saying that he had become so much stronger just from showing that vulnerability. Now, if somebody like that, who's in that sort of level, and I know George, if you're listening, I'm not pinpointing you as that kind of guy, but you know what I'm talking about. But if somebody that has that perception to other people, if people are looking at that sort of tough guy, that hard type of man, and he's able to be vulnerable and find himself coming through the other side at a much higher level because of it, none of us have an excuse for not doing it.
I think a big part of this is how we grow as well. I think for a lot of the time when we look at goal setting, for example, when we look at our lives, we look at it in a really linear manner. Like I need to get from point A to point B. What I realized is, one, we grow from the inside out, but like it's not about growing in this kind of like timeline fashion. We actually grow outwards. So we might have goals like our family goals, we might have our money goals, we might have our health goals, but we have to grow and expand into that. Otherwise, what happens is we might achieve one specific tangible physical goal, but we've sacrificed other things because we're just growing in one direction. And I think the easiest way to counter that is actually, there's a quote which is, I can't remember who said this, but it's go within or go without. And the power of reflection is so powerful, and it's been really paramount for me in the last few years alone. Like since we connected, and I left that job. It hasn't been a linear journey for me the last 2 years. I went through a period of being really struggling financially with stress, with overwhelm. I was basically in Australia paying a huge visa fee, had a lot of overheads and wasn't making money. I had no savings, had nothing. I was in debt. But this process really helped me move through that. I think a lot of the time people think, right, I need to make money and then I'll feel good, or I need to get to this point and then I'll feel good. But for me, it was actually acceptance. It's actually getting to a place of inner peace, right? I wasn't really like enthusiastic and I wasn't like super driven and happy, but I had inner peace. And from there, I was able to grow and keep growing effectively. But it took that, I had to eat dirt for a while before I realized like, actually, no, it's not about me forcing my way through. It's about there's something internal that needs to shift for me to then reach my external goals. Because our goals are you said this earlier, I think before we started recording, when you're talking about weight loss, right? And you're talking about weight loss as a byproduct of doing, the mindset work. It's the same with any aspects, right? Your improved relationship, your finances are a reflection of the internal work you do. Right? To make more money, you first need to be understanding that you're worth more money, like your services, whatever. If you're a coach, like it's about understanding your self-worth reflects the value you're putting out and the value you're charging for your services. Maybe it's if you're in a job and you're trying to get a promotion, it's understanding your self-worth internally, then reflects like, actually, no, I'm worth a lot, like what I'm doing is worth a lot more. And you can go and present the case to your boss or your manager and say, look, this is where I'm helping in this company, right? There's so many aspects of this, but it's about taking a step back and realizing the results, the tangible results are an outcome of the internal shift that needs to happen.
So what you're saying there is that, of course, your roadblocks were being in Australia, having to eat that dirt for a while, as you put it, which I think is quite a nice turn of phrase, actually.
Yeah.
But that's sort of the physical roadblocks that a lot of people will face, because, of course, you weren't alone there. Like, a lot of people face the same issues of money issues, or, other people might be experiencing relationship issues or anything else that actually seems to be standing in their way. But to overcome them, it's still the same process of taking that step back. Is that what you're saying?
100%. You look at, you just do a Google search on this, you'll see it. The number one problem in the world is money. Then it's health, right? And this is obviously perceived problems, but money is the number one perceived problem in the world. People don't think they have enough of it. But then what happens with a lot of people is they make more, and I was this person as well. This is why I can describe this so vividly. You make more money and you spend more money. So you don't learn skills. There's physical skills to this as well around financial literacy. But there's also some deep stuff that needs to happen there. And I actually did I put a question out on Facebook the other day around this. Loads of people were sharing their experience, which was really interesting. But a lot of people have a very negative relationship with money, which comes from their conditioning growing up. The same way that a lot of people have a negative relationship with health. Some people have negative relationships with their partner, right? It's all based on our conditioning. But again, going back to what I was saying earlier, you can be a victim to that, or you can process it, realize like, okay, well, that was a projection of my parents or my teachers or the people in my community or friends, whatever it was, right? That was their projection. I'm choosing to create my new path. And so if, first of all, you need to allow there is something outside of your current understanding, right? That's the way you grow. Like if we think that everything we know is true and everything else is false, we're never going to learn. Like for me, like I'm always an open book and ready to learn, because I know that I don't have anything figured out. Like that's my belief, because then I'm open to learning and new information and taking on new beliefs. Rather than, I used to be very stuck. And I find this as well in the personal industry, in the personal training industry. There's a lot of people who are very science-based, and they're very stuck in their ways. And especially doing a science degree, I was very analytical with everything, and so I was closed off to new ideas. Whereas for me, opening up, especially delving into spirituality, becoming an open book, like I'm learning every day, and not just like physically like reading a book or doing a course. Like I'm open to learning from other people's experiences, and it's not necessarily what they're saying is true, but it's understanding other people's perceptions of reality, and then me deciding whether I want to take that on as my own kind of understanding and belief as well.
It's like when you're on Facebook and you only like certain pages, so you're going down that rabbit hole of that one political view or that one ideology. And as a result, you get an obscured view of the world because that's all you're seeing. A lot of people still do have that very pigeonholed view, and they do have that negative relationship with their spouse or with money or with food or with exercise. And generally, that's a lot of the areas where you get a lot of alcohol problems, because that's the only thing they have a positive relationship with. And ironically, it's not even that positive. And a lot of that is based on what they were taught by their parents and what their parents were taught by their parents, and so on and so on. Because it's not actually their fault. And I think this is one of the things that a lot of people get a very obscure sort of view when they hear people talking the way we are. Because we're not saying that you're at fault, you've got to do this. This is how you're thinking right now, and we understand why. Consider a new worldview and see how that works out for you. When you start opening up to that, you're going to see the facts that come along with it. So even when you're so science-based or technical-based, you're going to come round to the new worldview once you allow the facts in. Because unless you've opened up your mind to it, you're not even going to see them.
100%, man. Like you're not at fault. Like we grow up the way we do. Like it's not my fault that growing up, my dad was an alcoholic. He was away a lot in the Navy. My mum was emotionally unavailable. I witnessed abuse. My brother was abusive. That's not my fault, but it is my responsibility to change my life. And I think that's the biggest thing here. It's like, look, accept everything that happened and realize, because we internalize this, especially when we go through childhood trauma. I internalize this on a really deep level, all these traumas from the past. And even though it was like not my fault at all, I blame myself for a lot of the issues that my parents were having when they were fighting and stuff like that. And it's like, and when I did the work on this, it's like, wow, holy shit, like I've internalized a lot of stuff here, because you're a sponge when you're a kid. And going back and accepting that and realizing it's not my fault. Even if I did something perceived as wrong, I was a child, right? And it wasn't my fault. Like I was just reacting to the way, the world in the way that I knew. But it's my responsibility to not carry on the same path. It's my responsibility to choose to think differently, to choose to connect with new people, to choose to move away and change my environment, right? Those are my choices, and it's my responsibility to live the best life possible, because as we shine, like it shines a light on other people. And it's, as you live your truth, again, it reflects on other people. Now, some people are going to look at that, and I still have people that try and drag me down and remind me of who I used to be, but I don't get attached to it anymore. I'm like, it used to trigger me, but now I'm like, that's cool. Like you just haven't been through your own journey yet. Right. But there's other people who see me going through this journey, who have followed me over the last few years, and they're like, wow, you've really moved through some stuff. Like you've really worked through the problems that I'm struggling with right now. And then that, in a way, gives them permission to work on themselves and be like, oh, it is possible for me to change, because they're exposed to that new ideology or that new idea.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense. So, tell you what, Hugh, on that note, what I'd like to really understand now is, what is your vision for what you're doing now? What do you see yourself achieving by effectively assisting and coaching coaches to become better coaches? Now, I know that was a lot of coaches in there, but there's a reason for it, and I want to know what you see yourself achieving from doing that.
Well, I look at it as a ripple effect. So I could get results with a few dozen people when I was a coach. Then when I started helping other coaches, I might help a dozen coaches who help a few dozen people. So I see it as I kind of learn new skills and elevate my tool set, my skill set, that passes on to other coaches, which then passes on. Some of the coaches, I work with coaching companies, and they actually qualify new coaches. So it's this huge ripple effect. And it might, from an outside looking in, it kind of looks like an MLM scheme, but it's like multi-level personal development. So again, as we elevate, everyone around us elevates. And so for me, it's about having this ripple effect of getting the world coached. Like, what if every single person in the world understood how to coach themselves out of their problems, how to elevate their emotions, how to work on themselves, how to ask the right questions? I know you said this, I think it was before the call, you said you have like a list of questions that you use to coach yourself. What if the whole world had access to that? And that's what really excites me. It's like, how can we start to shift humanity in a positive way? How can we be more loving and compassionate to other people, instead of throwing rocks at people and trying to, it's not about us like putting ourselves on a pedestal and being above everyone. It's how do we bring other people up with us? And so that's why I'm passionate about working with other coaches, because I know so many people, they start to, maybe they have been coached themselves and they've been through a journey of transformation, but maybe they're not applying those skills yet to other people, and they're stuck in their job, right? So they're stuck in a position where they're not serving other people in the way they know they can, which means they're not serving themselves because they're not living true to their purpose and their passion. So when they start to elevate and they start to actually do what they're passionate about, and they start helping other people, not just are they helping those people, but they're also living true to themselves, which passes on to the people around them. And it's a mirror for other people to realize that, oh, well, maybe I can work on myself as well. I talk to a lot of people who don't embody what they teach, right? Sometimes you go to a seminar, and I was like this in the past as well. You go to a seminar, you do a course, you learn something really cool, like some coaching technique, and you, instead of internalizing it and being like, okay, I'm going to work through this on myself, you just try and deflect it and teach it onto other people. I see that a lot in the coaching space. And I know this well because I did this when I used to struggle with alcohol. I struggled with alcohol, and whilst I'd worked through other areas of my life, I was still drinking quite heavily at the weekends, like very heavily, to be honest. And I was teaching other people who were having drinking problems. There were people in my coaching programs that had drinking problems. And I was basically regurgitating information, but I wasn't internalizing it. And so when I started really working on myself, I didn't even need to talk about this. It just showed up in my life, in my results, my energy, right? So again, it's that ripple effect of learning something, doing it, embodying it, and then teaching it. And then, people might be inspired by that on their own journey of transformation to then want to coach other people. And that's where this kind of ripple effect of coaching comes in. And I think coaching is such a powerful tool that you don't have to necessarily be a coach to coach other people. If you're a leader, if you're a manager, if you're a parent, right? You apply it with dog owners, right? So there's so many elements of coaching that are so powerful that I think if the whole world had access to, would just continue to make the world a better place.
I actually, when I do these podcasts, I have to actively stop myself from relating everything to canine behaviorism and dog training, because it's one of my biggest passions. But what I will say, just on because you mentioned it there, is that there is so many correlations with that when people hear the word coach and they think of like Coach Carter or a sports coach or a life coach or the motivational speakers up on the corporate stage, which, I've attended more corporate trainings than I can even remember. But the other thing we've got to remember is that coaching comes in so many different forms, as you say. Like when somebody's asking for assistance with their dog, you're not actually training the dog, you're coaching the owner. Because the dog's not misbehaving. Exactly what you were saying earlier with regards to being a child. The dog is only reacting to the environment and the actions of the leaders, which in a child's situation is the parents.
Yeah.
So it's all very similar in that sense. So whether you're a teacher, whether you're a parent, whether you're a pet owner, whether you're a peer, it doesn't matter if you're on the same level, if you're friends with people, you are coaching. So I guess what you're saying there is it makes a lot of sense. And although you're working with qualified coaches, that ripple down effect will have a big impact, because instead of teaching people how to do something, you're coaching them how to coach themselves and each other. And when you listen or read something, you retain like 20% of it. When you write something down or verbalize it, it's like 50%. But when you teach it to somebody else, it's up at like 80 to 85% that you retain of the information. So by coaching coaches to coach coaches, you're not just saying coach a lot, you're actually doing that ripple down effect that you were talking about. So my next question was actually going to be, what do you actually do to support them and actually help them do that? But you answered it kind of thoroughly there with regards to living the life that you're teaching or practicing what you preach. Because if you're trying to tell people to be sober, but you're a drunk yourself, it's not going to work out. Or if you're a financial planner, but have no money, people are going to be able to see through that.
Yeah. What I realized is one of the most important aspects of it is working out your story, your expertise, your skills, and tying that together in a way that you're like, okay, well, I actually really resonate with this type of person. I resonate with this type of person. I know I had that struggle that they've got right now, and so I can help them. It's like, if you're 5 steps ahead of someone, you help someone elevate whilst you're also getting coached, right? Again, I have a coach. I have I have various coaches and mentors. So for me, if I wasn't getting coached and mentored, I'd be here and, I could help clients rise to the same level as me, but then we're both stuck because I'm not elevating myself. So for me, it's about always having like other coaches and mentors and other, for me now it's not about having one person. I have mentors and coaches in pretty much every area of my life. But that's really important as well. So we're growing and embodying what we're doing, and that has a ripple effect down the line. So yeah, I think hopefully that answers your question.
It does, and you could actually put that into sort of a corporate managerial sense, in that the art of good management is surrounding yourself by people that can do the job better than you can. So when you're in a junior position, you've got the coach or the leader or the mentor within your supervisors and managers. When you get to that higher positions, the art of being really successful is by surrounding yourself with people who maybe don't see the big picture the same way you do, but are better at the different aspects, so that you're drawing from that pool of different coaches to improve yourself and the company or department that you're working for. So when you are coaching, because I'm very similar, because what I do has got so many different components to it, I can't have just the one coach. I've got a number of different people that I draw from, and they might not have the same sort of level of expertise in a certain area, but they're way higher up in one particular area that I need to better on myself. And that makes a lot of sense. So it's effectively giving people the pool of support that they need to improve themselves.
Yeah, exactly. And I think also where corporate structures are a little bit broken is that we view we have this hierarchy, and this person who's up here, who maybe is like in a high managerial position or a partner or something, they're not going to take advice from someone down here. Mm-hmm. But when you look at it collectively, and it's like, well, maybe this person who's a receptionist is an amazing mother or an amazing father, and this manager is having relationship issues, and they're having issues with their child, which is having an impact in their work, which ripples down the company. So maybe this person who's in a low-end position as a receptionist can actually coach this managerial position, this guy's managerial position, around something that's going to then have an impact on the company. So it's rather than looking at things from I think Google and Apple do this really well, from what I read, but it's not, rather than looking at something from like a systemic kind of view and just this, this hierarchical view, it's looking at it as a collective view and looking at every single person as having skills to bring to the table, and asking, getting people's feedback and valuing every single person in your company.
I was extremely lucky with the company I was in before I left to do this, because with most of the clients I worked with, to most of the vendors and the distributors that we used, it was very linear. And basically it was very much like, I will tell you what to do and you will do it. But within my company, it wasn't like that. And I think a lot of it's got to do with the fact that our global vice president came from a small fishing village in Scotland and started his career working on the fishing boats, and then just worked his way up through the rigs to the point where he was then a global vice president of an oil company. Now, not many people have got the grit to do that, but the fact that he did that meant that he had a much more realistic view of the skill set of everybody. He hadn't just gone to university, did an MBA and straight into a sort of upper global management position like so many people have. But a lot of people that have that sort of career trajectory, they're the ones that are doing, you will do what I say. But I remember very clearly we were having an issue in a technical sort of capacity. And I remember the boss saying, hold on a second, I'll be back soon. And he went down to the shop floor and he brought up Uncle Ngam and Uncle Ho, who were two subsea equipment fitters. And they felt a little bit, odd, because they came up, they're in the dirty coveralls, and they sat down at this big boardroom table. Within 5 minutes, these two technicians had solved a problem that a room full of engineers and managers had just spent an hour brainstorming and not being able to figure out. Now, if that doesn't tell you that you've got to appreciate the support and the skill set of people at all levels, I don't know what does.
Yeah, it's a great story and really good example. It's true. It's just that everyone has value to give.
I really appreciated that, because that was a big life lesson for me, and it also meant that everybody that was there that day became better leaders because of it.
Yeah, 100%. I think a lot of the time managers don't lead, they just manage people and micromanage, which again is just a reflection that they've not worked on stuff themselves from an internal level. So It's one of the reasons why a lot of the coaches I work with, when I'm teaching them stuff, I tell them to try and work with high level people. Because again, if you work with someone who's an executive in a company, they have a ripple effect on a lot of people in their company. Rather than working with a receptionist, whilst you can help her or him, if you work with one of these executives, then let's say you help this executive and she has a knock-on effect with everyone, 50 or 100 or 200 people in the company, that's going to be more profound. Obviously, you can charge more because you're working with someone who's making more income, but on the flip side, you're also, if you pinpoint you're working with someone that has more of an influence over other people, that ripple effect is larger.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense. So really, when we're asking the original question being, what is your vision for what you're doing now? It's effectively to coach those who have the power to influence the most people to have the biggest impact on the world.
I like that. I'm going to take that and put that on my website. Yeah, that's it. That's really well.
You're welcome to do it.
Yeah.
That's great. Yeah, I really like that. And I think that's very important because as much as it is very important to target specific people, I think by doing the ripple down effect, you will impact more people for sure. There's definitely fact to that. So on that note, if you had one piece of advice to give anybody listening, but more so if you're listening as somebody from a position of power, whether that be at work, in personal life, or in the community, listen to this advice because I have a feeling that this is going to be fairly profound. Not that there's any pressure here.
Be the change that you want to see. As cheesy, as cliche as that is, if you are getting irritated or triggered by something you're seeing in someone else, whether that's your partner, whether that's relationships are really good for mirroring this, whether that's a student and you're a teacher, whether that's a client and you're a coach, whether that's a colleague or an employee and you're an employer or a boss or a manager, if you're trying to change somebody, it's not going to work. Right? Telling somebody what to do, they might make some surface level changes, but they're not really going to internalize they're not going to have that drive to change. So you need to be and internalize the change that you want to see in somebody else. And that is what leadership is, right? That's the difference between leadership and managing somebody else, right? That's what causes a lot of conflicts in relationships. You tell somebody what's wrong with them. You say, you need to do this, you need to do this, you need to do this. And I still fall into this now. I'm not perfect. But every time something happens with me and my partner, rather than kind of blaming her or choosing sides or being like, I'm right and she's wrong, it's not even about that. It's just, okay, what do I want to see more of in her? Okay, what am I not doing in myself? Like just using that as a mirroring what you want to see in other people is such a powerful tool. So if you have a student, you're a teacher and there's a student that's really rebellious, why are they being rebellious? Well, they're not being... maybe they're not being understood. So then you can start reflecting that with yourself and being like, okay, well, what areas of my life am I not understanding others? So maybe you're not understanding that person, and that's why they're being rebellious. So there's always things you can do to mirror what it is that you want to change in someone. And I think that's the most important thing too. You don't change other people, you change yourself and mirror that onto other people.
Yeah, I think that's very sound advice there. So if there's anybody that's wanting to get in touch with you to find out more about what you do, or even just to reach out and ask you a question, what's your website, Facebook, Instagram, or any other means that people can get in touch with you? And don't worry for anybody listening, if you don't catch it, it will be in the show notes.
Yeah, so if you can search Hugh Robinson on Instagram and Facebook, you'll probably find me. I think my Instagram is Hugh Robinson Official, at Hugh Robinson Official. My website is hughrobinsonofficial.com. My email is hugh@hughrobinsonofficial.com. So it's my name, my email, my website. You can find me on all of those platforms. My main area, if you're looking at content, is my Facebook page. I do post on Instagram quite a bit as well, so feel free to connect with me there.
That's great, man. Well, thank you very much for being on the podcast.
Yeah, thank you, Fraser, for having me on. You've asked some really good questions as well, which is a really good way for me to start my day, because it's the morning here, so it's a good way for me to think a little bit differently. You know, it's always good having somebody else ask me questions, because I'm used to asking other people questions all the time. So it's nice for me to be able to sit and reflect after this and process some stuff. So yeah, thank you very much. Really appreciate you having me on the show.
You have been listening to the Noble Life podcast. To find out more about our guests, please take a look at the episode's show notes. This episode was brought to you by Noble Life, the online health and lifestyle coaching system. Noble Life works both with men and women living hectic lifestyles who know that they must improve their life's balance, their health and their happiness to become their best version. Noble Life coaches each aspect required to achieve this through the 4 pillars of physical, psychological, personal and practical. To find out more about what Noble Life can do for you, please visit our website at www.noblehealthcoach.com. Noble Life also now has an online store where you can get apparel which is designed to remind and keep you in tune with the Noble Code and to continuously strive towards better health and balance in our lives. You can check that out at our website at www.noblehealthcoach.com.